The morning I found myself screaming at Sharon Petersen through 6 inches of bulletproof glass at the county jail. I realized my life had taken a turn I never could have predicted when I moved to Pinewood Heights, Colorado 3 years ago. But let me back up to where this whole mess started, about 2 weeks before that jail visit. On one of the worst winter mornings I had seen in my 38 years of living. I woke up at 4 in the morning to the sound of wind howling like a freight train against my bedroom window. The house was shaking, and when I rolled over to check my phone, I saw 17 missed calls from the fire station. My stomach dropped. I was a volunteer firefighter and paramedic for Summit County, and 17 missed calls meant something serious was happening. I called back immediately and Chief Rodriguez picked up on the first ring. "Aaron, where the hell are you?" "Home, Chief. Sorry, I was dead asleep. What's going on?" "We've got a major situation. The blizzard dropped 4 feet overnight and we've got drifts up to 8 feet in some areas. The entire ambulance bay is completely blocked. We can't get the trucks out, and we just got a call about a cardiac event over on Spruce Lane. We need every available person here now to clear these drifts." I was already out of bed, pulling on my thermal underwear. "I'll be there in 20. I've got my tractor. I can help clear. Bring it. We need all the heavy equipment we can get." I hung up and finished dressing in record time. My John Deere 5075E was sitting in my garage, and I had a snow blade attachment that I used for exactly these kinds of emergencies. Living in Colorado at an elevation of nearly 9,000 feet meant being prepared for the worst winter could throw at you. And I took that responsibility seriously, especially as a first responder. The drive to the fire station normally took 15 minutes, but with the roads in the condition they were in, it took me almost 40 minutes even with my truck in 4-wheel drive. When I finally pulled into the station parking lot, I could see exactly what Chief Rodriguez meant. The ambulance bay, which faced north and caught the full force of the prevailing winds, was completely buried under a massive snowdrift that looked like a frozen tidal wave. Chief Rodriguez came running out as I backed my tractor off the trailer. "Thank God. We've got 2 other guys with plows, but we need to move fast. That cardiac call is getting worse." I fired up the John Deere, and the diesel engine roared to life with that distinctive rumble that always gave me a sense of satisfaction. The machine was a beast, and I had put a lot of money into winterizing it properly. I engaged the blade and started pushing into the massive drift that blocked the first bay door. The work was brutal. Even with the tractor's power, the snow was so densely packed that I could only take small bites at a time. The wind was still howling, easily 40 miles per hour, and it was trying to build the drift back up as fast as I was clearing it. My face was numb within minutes, even with my balaclava and goggles. But I kept at it, making pass after pass, slowly revealing the red metal of the bay doors beneath the white wall of snow. I had been at it for about 20 minutes, making real progress on the first door, when I saw a figure marching across the parking lot toward me. Even bundled up in a puffy pink parka, I recognized that distinctive walk. Sharon Petersen, president of the Pinewood Heights Homeowners Association, and the bane of my existence for the past 2 years. Sharon was 53 years old, had never been married, and had made the HOA her entire life's purpose. She was the kind of person who measured grass height with a ruler, who took photos of garbage cans left out past 7 in the morning, and who had once called a special meeting to discuss the offensive nature of a garden gnome in old Mr. Henderson's yard. I had crossed paths with her more times than I could count, usually over completely ridiculous violations she claimed I was committing. I saw her waving her arms frantically, but I could not hear anything over the tractor engine and the wind. I kept working, figuring she would realize this was not the time for whatever complaint she had. But Sharon was not the type to be ignored. She moved directly into my path, forcing me to stop the tractor or risk running her over. I pulled back on the throttle and leaned out. "Sharon, I'm working here. Emergency situation. Can this wait?" Her face was red, though whether from cold or anger I could not tell. "Aaron Zimmerman, you are in violation of at least 4 HOA regulations right now. That tractor is emitting excessive noise. You don't have approval for commercial equipment operation, and you're creating a public disturbance at an unreasonable hour." I stared at her in disbelief. "Sharon, I'm clearing the ambulance bay. There's a medical emergency, and we can't get the trucks out. I don't care if the president himself is having a heart attack. You need to file the proper paperwork before operating heavy machinery in a residential area. This is clearly outlined in Section 12, subsection 7 of the HOA bylaws. This isn't a residential area. This is the fire station. The fire station is within the boundaries of Pinewood Heights, which means it falls under HOA jurisdiction. Now turn off that tractor immediately, or I'll be forced to take action." I felt my blood pressure rising, which was not good when I was already exhausted and frozen. "Sharon, get out of my way. People could die because of this delay. Don't you dare threaten me, Aaron Zimmerman. I know my rights, and I know the regulations. You are operating illegally, and I am within my authority to report this violation." She actually pulled out her phone. At 4:30 in the morning, in the middle of a blizzard during a medical emergency, this woman pulled out her phone. And then she did something that still makes my blood boil when I think about it. She dialed 911. I could not believe what I was seeing. I hopped down from the tractor, my boots sinking into snow up to my knees. "Sharon, what are you doing?" She held up one finger to shush me and spoke into the phone. "Yes, hello. I need to report an illegal operation in progress at 2847 Mountain View Road. There's a man operating heavy machinery without proper authorization, creating excessive noise, and refusing to comply with lawful orders to cease his activities." I reached for the phone, but she turned away. Chief Rodriguez had noticed the commotion and was trudging over through the snow. Behind him, I could see 2 paramedics loading equipment into one of the trucks we had managed to partially expose. "Madam, I'm going to need you to spell your name," the 911 operator was saying, her voice tinny through Sharon's phone speaker. "And can you describe the nature of the emergency?" Petersen. Petersen. Sharon Petersen, president of the Pinewood Heights HOA. "And I already told you there's a man here with a tractor and he's being extremely aggressive and confrontational." Chief Rodriguez arrived, breathing hard. "Madam, I'm going to need you to end that call. Mr. Zimmerman is here at my request, clearing emergency access routes." Sharon ignored him, continuing to speak into the phone. The 911 operator was saying something, her tone changing. Sharon's face started to shift from righteous indignation to confusion. "I don't understand what you mean," Sharon said into the phone. "I'm reporting a violation." The operator's voice got louder, and I could just make out what she was saying. "Madam, I'm looking at our dispatch screen right now. The location you're calling from is Station 7. The man you're reporting is Aaron Zimmerman, one of our volunteer firefighters. He's clearing snowdrifts from the ambulance bay so we can respond to a cardiac emergency. You are interfering with emergency operations, which is a criminal offense." Sharon's face went pale, then red again. "But he's violating HOA regulations. Madam, HOA regulations do not supersede emergency operations. You need to leave the area immediately. If you continue to interfere, I will dispatch officers to remove you and file charges. Do you understand? Chief Rodriguez took the phone from Sharon's hand before she could respond. This is Fire Chief Manuel Rodriguez. Thank you for clarifying the situation. The individual in question is leaving now. He ended the call and handed the phone back to Sharon, who stood there with her mouth opening and closing like a fish. "Get off my property," the chief said, his voice cold and hard. "And if you ever interfere with emergency operations again, I will personally ensure you face the maximum criminal penalties." Sharon grabbed her phone and tried to recover some dignity. "This isn't over. The HOA has authority over all properties within our boundaries, and I will be filing a formal complaint with the county." She turned and marched back toward the parking lot, slipping twice in the snow but managing to stay upright. Chief Rodriguez watched her go, shaking his head. "That woman is unbelievable. You okay?" "Yeah, I'm fine. Just want to get this cleared so we can get that ambulance out. We got lucky. The patient's wife is a retired nurse. She's keeping him stable, but we need to move. Let's get back to work." I climbed back onto the tractor, my hands shaking slightly from the adrenaline. I had dealt with Sharon's nonsense before, but this was a new level of insanity. Calling 911 during an actual emergency because of a noise complaint was beyond anything I had imagined she was capable of. The work took another hour and a half. By the time we had cleared enough space for the ambulances to get out, the sun was starting to come up, turning the sky a pale gray that did nothing to warm the negative 15-degree temperature. The first ambulance rolled out at 6:15, lights flashing, and I felt a wave of relief knowing we had gotten it done in time. Chief Rodriguez came over as I was securing my tractor. "The patient is going to be okay." His wife kept him stable and the paramedics got there before any permanent damage. "Good work, Aaron." "Thanks, Chief. Just glad we could help." "Listen, about Sharon Petersen. I'm going to file a report with the county about her interference. What she did was serious. She tied up 911 during an active emergency, and she physically blocked emergency operations. That's not just annoying, that's criminal." I nodded, too tired to really process what that meant. "Whatever you think is best. Go home, get some sleep, you've earned it." I loaded the tractor back onto the trailer and drove home as the sun continued its slow climb over the mountains. The roads were still terrible, and the snow was still falling, though not as heavily as before. By the time I got home, I was so exhausted I barely managed to get out of my gear before collapsing onto my couch. I slept until 2 in the afternoon, when my phone ringing woke me up. It was a number I did not recognize, but something made me answer it. "Mr. Zimmerman." "This is Deputy Marshal Karen Fletcher with Summit County. I need to ask you some questions about an incident this morning at Fire Station 7. I sat up, suddenly wide awake. Yes, I was there. I was clearing snow from the ambulance bay." "I know. I've spoken with Fire Chief Rodriguez and reviewed the 911 call logs. I'm actually calling about Sharon Petersen. She's filed an official complaint against you with the county, claiming you assaulted her and operated equipment illegally. I need your statement on what happened." I spent the next 20 minutes recounting the entire incident, from the chief's call to Sharon's 911 call to the operator's response. Deputy Fletcher listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes. When I finished, she sighed. "Mr. Zimmerman, I want you to know that based on the evidence we have, including the 911 recording, you're not going to face any charges. In fact, it's Miss Petersen who's in legal jeopardy here. What she did this morning constitutes interference with emergency operations under Colorado Revised Statute 18-9-104. It's a Class 2 misdemeanor. I don't want to press charges. I said quickly. "I just want to be left alone to do my job." "I understand, and that's your right. However, the state may choose to pursue charges independently because of the nature of the offense. Interfering with emergency services isn't just a personal matter. It affects public safety. But I'll note in my report that you're not seeking to press personal charges." "Thank you. One more thing. Miss Petersen has also filed a civil complaint through the HOA, seeking fines and restrictions against you for violation of community regulations. You should expect to receive formal notice in the next few days. I'd recommend consulting with an attorney." After I hung up, I sat there staring at my phone, trying to process everything. Sharon was actually going to try to fine me for helping with an emergency. It was so absurd it almost seemed like a joke, but I knew Sharon well enough to know she was deadly serious. The formal notice arrived 3 days later, hand-delivered by the HOA's lawyer, a nervous-looking young guy who apologized 3 times while handing me the envelope. Inside was a 10-page document outlining my supposed violations and the penalties. $5,000 in fines, mandatory attendance at an HOA compliance seminar, and a prohibition on operating any equipment over a certain decibel level within community boundaries. I called my lawyer friend, Marcus Chen, who I had gone to high school with. Marcus had moved to Denver to practice law but still took calls from old friends. When I explained the situation, he started laughing so hard I thought he was going to choke. "Aaron, this is the most ridiculous thing I've heard in my entire legal career, and I once had a client sued for $1 million because his dog barked at a bird. You were operating under emergency authority. The HOA has literally zero jurisdiction. Can you help me fight this?" "I'll do better than that. I'll make sure Sharon Petersen regrets ever thinking she could pull this stunt. Send me everything you have. Every document, every communication, everything." Over the next week, things escalated in ways I never anticipated. The local newspaper, the Summit Daily, got wind of the story and ran a front-page article titled "HOA President Calls 911 on Firefighter During Emergency." The story went viral on social media, and suddenly, Sharon Petersen was the most hated woman in Summit County. Her photo was shared thousands of times with comments ranging from mocking to genuinely angry. Someone created a petition calling for her removal as HOA president that got over 10,000 signatures in 2 days. A local radio host devoted an entire segment to reading the HOA complaint letter in a dramatic voice, adding his own commentary that had me laughing despite the stress. But Sharon, true to form, doubled down. She gave an interview to a Denver news station where she insisted she had been right to report the violation, and that emergency services did not exempt anyone from following community rules. The interview was a disaster. The reporter kept pressing her on whether she understood that her actions had delayed a medical response, and Sharon kept deflecting to talk about property values and community standards. If we allow people to just ignore the rules whenever they feel like it, where does it end? She said on camera, her face pinched and angry. "Today it's a tractor at 4 in the morning. Tomorrow it could be someone painting their house neon pink or parking an RV on their lawn. Rules exist for a reason." The reporter, a sharp woman named Jennifer Todd, looked at her with barely concealed disgust. But Mr. Zimmerman wasn't ignoring the rules for his own benefit. He was helping emergency services respond to a person having a heart attack. You do understand the difference, don't you? "I understand that rules are rules, and no one is above them." That interview clip got played on national news. Suddenly, I was getting calls from morning shows and news programs wanting me to come on and tell my side of the story. I declined most of them, but I did agree to one interview with a local station, mainly to set the record straight. The interviewer, Greg Martinez, was sympathetic and let me explain the situation without interruption. When I finished, he asked, "What do you want people to know about this situation?" "I just want people to understand that first responders, whether volunteer or professional, are doing their best to help their communities. We don't do this for recognition or praise. We do it because it's the right thing to do. And when people interfere with that work, whether intentionally or not, they're not just causing problems for us. They're potentially putting lives at risk." "And what about the HOA fine?" "My lawyer is handling that. But I want to be clear. I would do the exact same thing again. If the chief calls and says he needs help clearing snow so ambulances can get out, I'm going to be there with my tractor, no matter what the HOA says." That quote got picked up and shared widely. I started getting messages from people all over the country, sharing their own HOA horror stories. It was eye-opening and depressing. There were stories of people being fined for having the wrong color mailbox, for planting flowers that were not on the approved list, for parking their car in their own driveway overnight. The more I read, the more I understood that Sharon was not an anomaly. She was just one example of a system that had given petty tyrants power over their neighbors. 2 weeks after the incident, Marcus called with news. "The HOA has agreed to drop all fines and restrictions." "Really? Just like that?" "Well, not exactly just like that." I sent them a very strongly worded letter explaining that if they pursued this action, I would file a countersuit for harassment, abuse of process, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. I also pointed out that the negative publicity was affecting property values, which is the one thing HOAs care about more than their rules. They folded like a cheap tent. "That's amazing. Thank you, Marcus. But there's more. Sharon Petersen is facing criminal charges." The district attorney's office decided to pursue the case independently. She's being charged with interference with emergency operations and misuse of 911. She could face up to a year in jail and a $5,000 fine. I felt a strange mix of emotions hearing that. Part of me was glad she was being held accountable, but part of me just felt tired. "When's the court date?" "Next month. You'll probably be called as a witness." The weeks leading up to the trial were tense. Sharon hired an expensive lawyer from Denver, some guy with slicked back hair and a tan that looked spray painted on. He started a media campaign trying to paint Sharon as a dedicated community volunteer who had been overwhelmed by a stressful situation and made a mistake in judgment. The problem with that narrative was the 911 recording. The prosecutor, a woman named Deborah Ortiz, played it at every opportunity. You could hear Sharon's voice, clear and insistent, demanding that I stop working while the operator tried to explain that I was there on emergency authority. You could hear Sharon arguing, refusing to back down, even as the operator told her she was breaking the law. Deputy Marshal Fletcher had also submitted her report, which included statements from Chief Rodriguez and the 2 paramedics who had been on scene. All of them confirmed that Sharon had interfered with emergency operations and that her actions had delayed response time. The trial lasted 3 days. I was called to testify on the second day. Walking into that courtroom and seeing Sharon sitting at the defense table, looking small and angry, was surreal. Her lawyer tried to make me look like some kind of vigilante who enjoyed flouting rules, but Deborah Ortiz shut that down quickly. "Mr. Zimmerman, can you explain your training and experience as a first responder?" she asked. "I've been a volunteer firefighter and paramedic for Summit County for 5 years. I have all required certifications, and I participate in regular training exercises. I've responded to hundreds of calls, including structure fires, medical emergencies, and wilderness rescues. And on the morning in question, you were responding to a direct request from Fire Chief Rodriguez to assist with clearing snow from the ambulance bay. Is that correct? Yes. Did you have any reason to believe you were violating any laws or regulations? No. I was operating under emergency authority, which supersedes local ordinances. Sharon's lawyer, whose name was Brett Hollings, tried to trip me up on cross-examination. Mr. Zimmerman, isn't it true that you have a history of conflicts with Miss Petersen? We've had disagreements about HOA rules, yes. Disagreements that have sometimes become heated. I've never threatened her or been anything but civil, even when I disagreed with her. But you resent her authority, don't you? I resent arbitrary rules that make no sense and aren't applied fairly, but I follow the law and I respect legitimate authority. So you get to decide what's legitimate. Deborah Ortiz stood up. Objection. Argumentative. Sustained, the judge said, looking annoyed. Mr. Hollings, move on. The most damaging testimony came from Chief Rodriguez. He explained in detail how Sharon's interference had added at least 15 minutes to the response time. He also explained that those 15 minutes could have been the difference between life and death for the cardiac patient. In your professional opinion, Chief Rodriguez, did Miss Petersen's actions endanger public safety? Deborah Ortiz asked. Absolutely. Every minute of delay in a cardiac emergency increases the risk of permanent damage or death. Miss Petersen didn't just inconvenience us. She put a man's life at risk. Sharon's lawyer tried to argue that she had been acting in good faith, believing she was enforcing legitimate rules. But the 911 recording made that argument impossible to sustain. Even after the operator explained that I was working under emergency authority, Sharon had continued to interfere. That showed a deliberate disregard for public safety, not a simple misunderstanding. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. They found Sharon guilty on both counts. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s named Margaret Feldman, did not look sympathetic. Miss Petersen, I have presided over many cases in my years on the bench, but rarely have I seen such a clear example of someone prioritizing their own sense of authority over public safety. Your actions on the morning in question were not just misguided. They were dangerous and potentially deadly. You showed no remorse at the scene, and you have shown no remorse in this courtroom. Sharon's lawyer stood up. Your Honor, my client has dedicated years of her life to improving her community. She made a mistake in judgment, but she does not deserve to be treated like a criminal. Mr. Hollings, your client tied up emergency services during an active crisis because she was more concerned about noise regulations than human life. That is the definition of criminal behavior. Miss Petersen, I sentence you to 90 days in county jail, suspended to 45 days with time served, 1 year of probation, 500 hours of community service, and a $5,000 fine. Additionally, you are prohibited from holding any position of authority in a homeowners association for a period of 10 years. Sharon's face went white. I watched as the bailiff led her away, and I felt that same strange mix of emotions. Relief that it was over. Satisfaction that justice had been served. But also a kind of sadness that it had come to this. Outside the courthouse, reporters were waiting. I gave a brief statement thanking the prosecutor and the jury, and emphasizing that I hoped this case would serve as a reminder that emergency operations must be allowed to proceed without interference. Then, I got in my truck and drove home. The story did not end there, though. Sharon served her 45 days, and when she got out, she found that the world had moved on without her. The HOA had elected a new president, a reasonable guy named Tom Bradford, who immediately began revising the more ridiculous rules. The provision about commercial equipment was removed. The noise restrictions were modified to include exemptions for emergency operations and reasonable work hours. I ran into Sharon once, about 6 months after the trial, at the grocery store in Frisco. She was by herself, pushing a cart down the cereal aisle. She saw me and froze. For a moment I thought about just walking past, but something made me stop. "Hello, Sharon." She looked at me with an expression I could not quite read. "Hello, Aaron. How are you doing?" She seemed surprised by the question. "I'm managing. I moved out of Pinewood Heights. I'm renting a place in Dillon now. I'm sorry things turned out the way they did." She studied my face, trying to figure out if I was being sarcastic. When she realized I was sincere, something in her expression softened slightly. "You know, I spent a lot of time in jail thinking about what happened. I convinced myself I was right, that I was just enforcing the rules. It took me a long time to understand that I was using those rules as a way to feel important, to have control over something. That's a hard thing to admit. My therapist says I have control issues stemming from childhood trauma. Apparently, growing up in chaos makes some people desperate for order." She laughed bitterly. "I'm the HOA horror story now, the cautionary tale. People make mistakes, Sharon. What matters is what you do after." I have 437 hours of community service left. I'm working at the food bank in Breckenridge. It's actually not terrible, helping people, without judging them or trying to make them follow arbitrary rules. That sounds good. I'm sorry, Aaron, for what I did. For all of it. You were trying to help someone and I was so focused on being right that I couldn't see it. I appreciate that." We stood there awkwardly for a moment, then Sharon nodded and pushed her cart past me. I watched her go, feeling like maybe there was some hope for her after all. Some people never learned. Some people spent their entire lives doubling down on their mistakes. But Sharon had been forced to confront the consequences of her actions, and maybe, just maybe, she was becoming a better person because of it. Life in Pinewood Heights improved dramatically after Sharon's departure. Tom Bradford turned out to be an excellent HOA president. He focused on actual community issues like maintaining common areas and organizing neighborhood events, rather than measuring grass height and monitoring paint colors. The monthly meetings became productive rather than contentious. People actually started volunteering for committees. I continued my work as a volunteer firefighter and paramedic. The following winter, we had another major storm, and once again I was called out to clear snow from the station. This time, nobody interfered. In fact, several neighbors came out to help, bringing coffee and sandwiches for the crews. It was what community was supposed to be about. People coming together to help each other, not tearing each other down over trivial rules. The cardiac patient I had been trying to help that morning survived, by the way. His name was Robert Chen, and he was Marcus's uncle, which I did not realize until months later. He made a full recovery and sent me a thank you card with a generous donation to the volunteer fire department. In the card, he wrote, "Thank you for being there when my family needed you. Thank you for putting people above rules." I kept that card on my refrigerator for years. It reminded me why I did what I did, and why it was important to stand up against people who valued order over compassion, rules over humanity. The case got some attention in legal circles. Several lawyers wrote articles about it, discussing the limits of HOA authority and the importance of emergency operations exemptions. A few municipalities even revised their codes to make it explicitly clear that HOA rules could not interfere with emergency services. It was a small victory, but a meaningful one. Marcus told me that he had been contacted by dozens of people across the country dealing with similar HOA issues. He started specializing in HOA law, helping homeowners fight back against overreaching boards and unreasonable restrictions. He said my case had inspired him to focus on that area of law, and he was making a real difference. You know what the best part is? He told me over beers one night at a bar in Silverthorne. These HOA bullies are used to people just rolling over and accepting their authority. They are not prepared for someone to actually fight back with a lawyer who knows the law. Half the time, just sending a letter is enough to make them back down. That's great, Marcus. I'm glad something good came out of all this. More than just something good. You changed the conversation about HOAs in this state. People are paying attention now. They are reading their CC and Articus before buying houses. They are running for HOA boards to reform them from within. One viral story about a guy with a tractor turned into a whole movement. I laughed, feeling embarrassed. I was just trying to help clear some snow. Yeah, and Rosa Parks was just trying to sit down on a bus. Sometimes the most important moments come from people just trying to do the right thing. As the months turned into years, the incident faded from public memory, but its impact remained. I still got occasional emails from people thanking me for standing up to HOA overreach. I still saw articles reference the case when discussing the limits of community association authority. And every time I fired up my tractor to clear snow, I thought about that morning and how a simple act of community service had turned into something much bigger. Sharon continued her community service and therapy. I heard through the grapevine that she had gotten a job at a nonprofit helping homeless families find housing. Apparently, she was good at it, using her organizational skills in a positive way for once. She never moved back to Pinewood Heights, but I would occasionally see her at community events around the county. We would nod to each other politely. Two people who had been on opposite sides of a battle neither of us had wanted to fight. The Pinewood Heights HOA continued to function under Tom Bradford's reasonable leadership. Property values remained stable. The neighborhood looked good. And somehow, amazingly, all of this happened without anyone needing to measure grass height with a ruler or fine people for having the wrong color flowers. Chief Rodriguez retired 2 years after the incident, and at his retirement party, he pulled me aside. You know that morning with Sharon Petersen? I think about that sometimes. It could have gone so much worse. If that patient had died, if those extra 15 minutes had made the difference, Sharon would have had to live with that. We all would have. But he didn't die. The system worked. This time, but it's a reminder of how fragile it all is, how much we depend on people doing the right thing even when someone is screaming at them to stop. I would do it again, Chief. Every time. I know you would. That's why you are one of the good ones, Aaron. Looking back now, 3 years after that freezing morning when I found myself arguing with Sharon Petersen while a man fought for his life, I can see how much that moment changed things. Not just for me, but for the whole community. It forced us to have conversations about authority and accountability, about rules and compassion, about what really mattered when push came to shove. The truth is, HOAs exist for legitimate reasons. They maintain property values, ensure common areas are cared for, and provide a framework for community decision-making. But like any organization that gives people power over their neighbors, they can become corrupted by individuals who value control over common sense. Sharon Petersen was not a monster. She was just a person who had lost perspective, who had become so focused on enforcing rules that she forgot why those rules existed in the first place. The tragedy was that it took a criminal conviction and jail time for her to realize that. The hope was that her story might help others avoid making the same mistakes. As for me, I continued living in Pinewood Heights, continued volunteering with the fire department, and continued maintaining my tractor for those inevitable Colorado blizzards. The HOA never bothered me again. In fact, Tom Bradford asked me to join the board, but I politely declined. I had no interest in meetings and bylaws. I just wanted to live my life, help my neighbors when they needed it, and be left alone to do my job. The John Deere still sits in my garage, ready to go at a moment's notice. The snow blade is maintained and sharp. And if Chief Rodriguez's successor ever calls at 4 in the morning saying the ambulance bay is blocked, I will be there within 20 minutes, tractor loaded and ready to work. And this time, if anyone tries to stop me, I have a whole county full of people who will tell them exactly where they can stick their HOA regulations. That cold February morning taught me that sometimes doing the right thing means ignoring the rules. It taught me that authority without wisdom is tyranny. And it taught me that communities work best when people focus on helping each other rather than controlling each other. These might seem like simple lessons, but they are ones that Sharon Petersen learned the hard way and ones that I will never forget. The ambulance bay is always clear now. The equipment is always ready. And the people of Summit County know that when they call for help, someone will be there, no matter what obstacles have to be moved, no matter whose petty regulations have to be ignored, no matter what it takes. Because that is what being part of a community really means. Not following arbitrary rules, but taking care of each other when it matters most.